In the third quarter of 2025, Cloudflare mitigated the largest cyber attack ever recorded, 29.7 terabits per second, roughly 14 billion packets every single second. A few weeks later, Microsoft Azure absorbed a single attack peaking at 15.72 terabits per second, sourced from more than 500,000 different IP addresses simultaneously. Neither of these attacks came from a sophisticated government hacking unit or a specialized data center. They came from ordinary consumer devices, routers, security cameras, DVRs, sitting in ordinary homes, hijacked without their owners ever noticing. The mechanics are simpler than the scale suggests. Attackers use automated tools to scan billions of internet-connected addresses, searching for devices protected only by weak or default passwords, or running outdated, unpatched firmware. Once found, malware installs itself, giving the attacker remote control while the device is continues functioning normally from its owner's perspective. The doorbell still rings, the router still routes traffic. That device then connects silently to central command server, becoming one soldier in an army that can, on command, be pointed simultaneously at a single target. The raw material available to attackers has grown explosively. The global population of connected IoT devices reached 21.1 billion by the end of 2025, up 14% year over year, and is projected to reach 39 billion by 2030. As that population has grown, attackers' interest has grown even faster. Telecommunications equipment maker Nokia reported a five-fold increase in malicious IoT botnet activity in a single year, with the number of activity compromised devices climbing from roughly 200,000 to 1 million. One specific device category dominates this threat disproportionately. Routers alone account for over 75% of all observed IoT cyber attacks, the single point through which nearly every other device in home network connects to the internet, making a compromised router simultaneously a target, a weapon, and a gateway to everything else on the same network. Three malware families in particular, Mirai, Muzi, and GavGate, together account for roughly 75% of malicious attacks IoT payloads currently in circulation. Perhaps the most striking detail in the entire IoT security landscape is how little the underlying vulnerability has actually changed. The original Mirai botnet, which shocked the security world in 2016, compromised devices by systematically trying a list of just 62 common default username and password combinations. In 2026, that same basic technique still works. The installed base of devices still running factory default credentials like admin or root numbers in the hundreds of millions, despite a decade of industry awareness campaigns and in some jurisdictions actual legislation requiring unique default passwords. It is worth understanding the specific botnet behind these 2025 records in more detail, because its growth trajectory illustrates how quickly this threat can scale. The Aisuru botnet, classified by researchers as turbo-neural class, an evolution of the original Mirai architecture, was built from an estimated 300,000 to 700,000 compromised consumer routers, DVRs, and IP cameras. Attacks above 1 terabit per second, once considered exceptionally rare, grew 227% quarter over quarter as this botnet scaled, with hyper-volumetric attacks now averaging 14 per day globally. A single botnet built entirely from home devices in other words, now routinely capable of disrupting infrastructure at a scale that once required nation-state level resources. Regulation is finally catching up to this threat with a concrete, detailed, dated deadline worth tracking. The European Union's Cyber Resilience Act introduces a requirement that manufacturers disclose actively exploited vulnerabilities in connected devices within 24 hours of becoming aware of them, a dramatically compressed timeline compared to historical industry practice, where vulnerabilities have often gone unpatched and undisclosed for years. That disclosure clock begins running on September the 11th, 2026. It is a meaningful structural change, but it addresses future vulnerabilities and manufacturer behavior going forward. It does nothing to remediate the hundreds of millions of already deployed, already vulnerable devices currently sitting in homes worldwide. Given that regulation addresses the future, not the present installed base, the practical defense remains squarely in individual hands, and it's less complicated than the scale of the threat might suggest. Changing every connected device's default password at setup, router, camera, doorbell, smart speaker eliminates the single most common attack vector outright, enabling automatic firmware updates, a feature that frequently ships disabled by default and requires an explicit opt-in in September opt-in step most consumers skip. Closes the second most common vector, known already patched vulnerabilities that remain exploitable for years simply because updates were never applied. The most powerful cyber weapons currently breaking world records aren't sitting in some hidden server farm. They are sitting on shelves in ordinary living rooms, disguised as doorbells and routers and baby monitors, doing exactly what they were bought to do, while silently doing something else entirely in the background. The fix for the vast majority of them was available at setup, took under 5 minutes, and was simply never applied. Looking forward to your reflections, feedback, questions, and personal experiences. Thank you so much for being present, and looking forward to see you in the next lecture.